Welcome to the Hohman Design podcast. We've gathered a bunch of curious minds again. Of course, Luke, Andre, and Kevin are with us. And today we're going to talk about physical security. And I'm talking about locks. And we've got some experts in the room, I think. These aren't lock inventors, but each one of these guys have experience with defeating locks. And I have a few stories myself. So let's talk about locks. Can somebody take us out of the gates?
Sure.
Back us away from the gates? What's the airline? What's the expression I'm looking for?
Push back from the gate.
Push back from the gate. Who can push us back from the gate?
So I had an unnatural fascination with locks as a kid. I would collect them and learn about their mechanism. And I got in trouble for stealing a bunch of locks from a county water treatment facility when I was a kid. So that was a negative lock experience. But
you don't feel like I've put you up to this, do you? Like saying that? Before the episode, I said, we don't have to talk about the locks.
No, it's fine.
Right.
I became a very law-abiding citizen as a result, and the system worked. But part of the misbehavior was stealing all of the padlocks from a county water treatment facility. They had all the same keying. It was master lock with I think it was a 4-pin lock, and I found a key inside the facility when I broke into one of the outbuildings, and I got the key that fit all the padlocks. So every week I would go back there with my key and take all of the locks and
harvest them.
I had tonnage of locks. They caught me eventually, but that was my unhealthy interaction with locks as a young person.
For telling war stories, I might have one of my own. When I was working in high school theater, we would work late into the night, 2 a.m., I think even 4 a.m., and everything's closed, plus we're working, we can't leave. So we desperately wanted into the school lunchroom. And I don't recall that we ever were stealing anything, but we would put some cash in the drawer and leave with our dinner. And the way we had to get into the lunchroom was by obtaining a key that was hanging in the athletic director's office. And the athletic director's office naturally was locked. And so
with a drop ceiling?
We went into the crawl space and came in through the drop ceiling. And we had developed a method where we were kind of Mission Impossibling it out over the ceiling. We'd remove a tile, but then you had to hang in the dark. This is before everyone had a light on their cell phone. I don't know that we even had any flashlights on stage. I didn't own my mag light that, I carried it for years in the film industry. But we would hang down into the darkness, half in and half out of the room, and drop down into the black. And so I was the volunteer for that part of the mission. And I knew exactly where to drop. As long as I dropped down right near the door, there wasn't going to be any furniture there.
And you didn't have to put them back that way.
To land it. No, luckily we could
once you have the key, you've got it.
And we'd just lock ourselves out, walk out, and that was fine. Well, a good friend of mine who was my partner in crime here wanted the chance to do it and was leaning back over the ceiling, fully extended out. We're holding on to an I-beam, and our feet are reached way over to the edge of the load-bearing wall, and we're trying to get the tile out from under, and suddenly, boom. He disappears, takes the entire drop ceiling in with him like a black hole. All the T-stock, all the tiles disappear. And he falls right into the middle of the room, which is going to be a tiny room as big as a set. And it's going to be half on, half off a desk falling backwards. And I'm just like, he's dead. And suddenly the lights come on. And of course, it's a disaster area. So however many hours we were about to put in on set building that night went to the
putting
complete
a ceiling
restoration of this place. And I started going into every classroom and looking in the ceiling. And sure enough, I found the deposit of leftover tiles from the end of the installation job. And it was enough tiles for us to...
How did you bend all the framework back into place?
We had one of these guys who had graduated the year before and was a close friend and had gone into that profession. He was a professional installer. He was one of those guys who seemed like he was, 21-year-old high school senior, and now he was a working professional. And luckily, we had his number. We called him, and he came back to
Bail you out.
Wow.
to bail us out. So he laid in the track, and we came in with all the tiles and vacuumed everything up to perfection.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
that was our little.
Amazing. And no work got done that night? He paid dearly.
No, we were paying for it. 10 minutes to curtains.
Right.
Yeah, when it was time to do the play, we wish we had those hours back, I'm sure.
Wow.
Oh, man.
That's amazing.
Incredible. And that's something that I learned also, just trying to get into places I wasn't supposed to be because I wanted something that I felt entitled to. And it's kind of the first point that I would make is there's a big difference between access and authority.
Yeah,
And-
yeah. Locks keep the honest people honest.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me a little bit about each of the bits of professional experience you've gone on to have with locks many years later, and like the extent to which you're qualified to work on them and other things.
I did get my locksmith license for the state of Virginia. It's through the Department of Criminal Justice Services. And I have some experience doing some what you might call door mechanic kind of work, repairing existing systems or installing some new systems. Nothing really fancy, not designing a security layout or designing an access control layout. I'm not someone who picks locks or knows how to defeat them very well, except just kind of conversationally. And most of what I've done was some simple tasks for some customers, but the whole thing is fascinating. And I enjoyed being part of a school also that was teaching this.
Yeah, watching lockpicking is a YouTube rabbit hole I can find myself going down.
Sure.
And I love also creative defeats, even more than going after the tumblers, is when somebody like takes a aluminum can and slides it down the bolt and pushes the spring mechanism out of the way with like basically a sleeve.
Yeah.
Or on a
Or ways to trick heat sensors. A lot of doors will allow exit if they think a person is there. Even after a facility's been turned into its secure state, it's locked up. The sensors might be looking for a warm body to let them out, and if you can trick them,
Make
then,
a warm body.
then
Yeah,
that's a way
shooting
in.
hairspray on fire under the
Yeah,
back of the door.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. That might be Hollywood.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of a balloon or something. What do you just get some hot air and
Yeah,
shove
right.
it under there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to mention another type of lock defeating that fascinated me right away, which was, I think, on early like Kryptonite style bike locks with the round keys. People were taking a Bic pen shaft, and it was so malleable that you can just shove it. It was the same diameter, and you just shove it into the lock, and it would conform to the
Oh, wow.
necessary shape. Because so you just jam it in there, and it would
Give it a
do
turn.
everything it needed
Yeah.
to do, and you'd be right in there. So they changed what they were doing as a result of that, of course.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, my background is more in digital security, but I certainly have some experience in the physical security space, and just kind of recently getting into some of the lock picking and understanding how they work and the engineering behind it. What's really struck me is that a lot of the lock design and marketing really sort of creates a sense of security more than actual security. And there's a lot of YouTube channels you can follow where it's kind of like every video is here's a new lock and like here's how insecure it actually
How
is.
many
And-
minutes or
Yeah.
seconds does it take for us to figure out this brand new?
And it's
lock?
crazy. And that to me, I think is something that just creates a sort of takeaway of security is hard, and the perception of security isn't necessarily an indicator that it's actually secure. And when you see a lot of, especially consumer grade, locks and locking devices, it's really likely that if it's $10 at Walmart or whatever, that it's about $10 worth of security, and you should think through that before moving
It's
forward.
the feeling of security, as somebody I listen to, Steve Gibson, always says. The feeling of security and actual security are very far apart.
Yes, they are.
And if you make an entryway very, very secure, you've just made the window next to it the choice of the criminal. So it's a whole approach.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting thing, though. Something can be easy to defeat or easy to overcome or even easy to smash and still be high security if it triggers some kind of a response or an intervention. So if I have a window that is easy to smash with a brick, but I have a guard or there's someone listening or there's a sensor on it and then something happens next, then it may still be a secure environment for my purposes and for my budget because intervention is on the way now.
The layers.
The layers, right. So sometimes security is just about, will the perpetrator prevail? Not necessarily can we keep them out, but can we make sure they never prevail? Because no one has the budget for an infinite success rate.
And in fact, in the design of security, that's creating an intentional sort of choke point or not necessarily a weak spot, but a particular place and time that you want somebody who's attempting to pierce through that to be while you trigger your response team. That's part of the good
put
design.
somebody in a magnetic enclosure.
Right.
and of course, that's why there's a ruler, at the door of every 7-Eleven. Is that this is their chance to snapshot the person as they run out the door and get some basic points of description down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always struck by how Hollywood portrays lock picking. As you sneak up to the door and you're like, okay, I'm in. And that is so far from my experience anyway of lock picking. My experience is you sit there crouched down and all huddled up and you're uncomfortable, and 30 minutes later you finally happen upon the right geometry of the rakes and
Or you have to rake it. I mean, it's a violent picking.
Right, and you just
where you're
happen to hit on it.
Or because an electronic pick, until I had seen one in operation, I was fascinated. I was like, oh, I don't want just a lock picking set. I want that electric thing, like an electric toothbrush.
The thing that you squeeze in.
You do that too. You can
A pick gun.
or whether it's manually activated, but it basically just just buzzes
And
the
you're hoping the
tumblers,
pins line
and
up.
you're hoping as they vibrate, you're putting constant turning tension on it, so that
Not too much to
anytime
bind
they happen
everything.
to pat,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the magic combination of you.
Yeah, and spooled pins, or there's some other things you can do to make that hard to do. There's things you can do to fight that. It all adds a little bit of cost. It all adds a little bit of complexity. And most doors that are protecting something really nice may have multiple keys that fit. So when I want 5 different levels of key authority to all fit one particular door, like the front door, then I've made it easier to defeat.
You put more shear lines in
Put more
play.
shear lines in. Yeah.
Anybody got interesting stories about being locked in to somewhere?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What do you got?
I don't have one.
Oh yeah.
I was just really hoping someone
yeah,
did.
yeah.
Good. I've got one good one. When my son was 18 months old, roughly. This is a Cherokee story. I know our audience will know that we're big into Cherokees around here. I had a 2000 Cherokee, and 18-month-old son left in my care. My wife was out, and the two of us were at home, and I thought it would be a good time to work on the car. And I needed some place to contain my son. So I'm thinking, I'm going to go, whatever I was doing under the hood, changing the oil or whatever. So I put him in the car. This is stupid.
That brings a whole new meaning to the word passenger compartment.
Yes, yeah.
When you say you needed to contain
I've
them.
got the Cherokee is in the driveway facing the road. The hood's up. It's running. He's in the car loose, kind of climbing around, right? And my thought was, well, he can't reach the pedals, so he couldn't put it in gear, that kind of thing. He hits the locks. So I'm outside the car. It's running. It's facing the road, and he's loose, climbing around, messing with the steering wheel, and I'm freaking out. And I'm thinking, okay, which window do I break that's going to be the least dangerous? I'm thinking, okay, I could crack the windshield right in the corner, but maybe I should go for one of the back. But if I go to the back, he's going to go to the back, and it's going to be... And the immediate thought was, okay, I got to get this thing to stop running. And the hood was up, fortunately. So I ran around to the hood, and I said, okay, there's no distributor. It's a 2000 Cherokee. It's all like rail-based coil packs. And there was no spark plugs to unhook. So I'm thinking, okay, injectors. So I start pulling injectors, the electronic portion of injectors. It kept running. And finally, I ended up pulling open the air intake and cramming my hand over the 4-inch bore, about sucked my whole arm in, but I was able to choke the engine to stop. But and then I called the county police, and they're like, "Well, we could send a commercial locksmith, but we don't really do anything with that. You're kind of on your own."
That's not what I've heard is that's the only time that a police officer will help
Yeah,
you
I
into
was
your
really
vehicle when
surprised.
there's somebody trapped inside
Wow.
it. When
Yeah.
your child's inside the car, every cop still carries a Slim Jim, and for
That's what
cars
I
of
was
a certain
hoping,
age,
right.
they'll be able to get in easily.
Yeah.
It's only when you just say, "Hey, I
I'm
locked my
locked out
keys in."
at
They're
the
like,
mall, right?
"Yeah,
Yeah.
No, I
have
was
a nice
pretty
day.
shocked by their
Thanks for
nonchalant
calling."
answer of, "Yeah, you kind of
That's
on your own."
Maybe
amazing with
'cause you were
someone
at
in
home
the
already.
car.
So he's still in the car now.
Yes, he's 10 years old now. No, he once I got the engine stopped, the urgency went way down, and I just stood outside long enough for him to grab the handle and pop the door open. It was a crisis. Needless to say, my wife didn't hear about that one for a while.
Yeah, waiting period.
I'm glad
there was
you-
a waiting period.
The story was impounded.
It was, definitely.
I'm glad you broke the ice on it prior to now, though.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
comment section would blow up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was all good.
Well, I did lock myself in. There was a film studio in Charlotte, North Carolina. It may still be in effect, called Boulevard Films, and they were in a kind of a industrial park, not unlike Scott's Addition, actually, a part of Charlotte called South End, I think, if I remember. And they had this long building, and it was several floors. There was a basement floor plus 2 floors, so it's 3 stories, and we had some things stored down at the bottom level in the back of the building, and there was a stairwell in the back. All the offices were in the front, and I mean, it was, several hundred feet and several rooms, and this was in the days where we had pagers instead of cell phones. So I went down the stairs, got what I needed, and came back up the stairs in the back, and I was locked
In the
out on the
stairwell.
3rd floor. So I go back down to the 1st floor, I'm locked in on that level as well. And so I'm like, it was a pre-production day. I mean, if it was a shoot day, you'd be trapped for anywhere from 5 minutes to a few hours. But I mean, help's on the way. Inevitably, somebody's going to be there. But it was a pre-production day. There might have only been 2 or 3 of us working, and nobody in the office would have any idea what's going on. So I'm sitting there going, "This is interesting," and I had known about using credit cards to open doors before, and had never looked into it personally. But I thought, okay, now's the time. It's time to learn. And so I started examining the door, and it became very obvious to me the conditions under which that would work and wouldn't work. And I don't know, maybe I didn't want to ruin the only thing I had with me, like my driver's license or something. So I took my shoelace off, and I was able to feed it around the lock device and just
Oh, wow.
Nice.
loop it around and pull it out.
So
And
you were able to defeat the dead latch.
exactly, yeah.
Or maybe there
just with a
wasn't
shoe.
one.
Yeah, it was definitely an easy one to do. But so I was simply able to do it. Later, at the same film studio, years later, I locked myself out in again, and this time I was wearing a 1960s style army watch that has a canvas band. That's one long band that you weave through the back of the watch, and I was able to slip the watch band through and let myself out.
It's very MacGyver.
Yeah. And you show up back at where you're supposed to be with a great story, and everybody says, "Where have you been for these
Yeah.
3 hours?"
Luckily, it was 3 minutes.
Okay.
This was both of those situations resolved themselves pretty quickly, and I was kind of secretly quite proud of myself. But after that, I actually did fashion what I called the key to the city, which was an old hotel key that I had, a card, and I cut a notch in it that was exactly placed properly so that I could either force the other side of the card through the door from one side, or if I was on the other side and it was optimally positioned, I could slip my notch over the latch and
draw it backwards.
Draw it backwards and get myself in. So there are a couple different things, but I don't
What
know
happens
that
if you
that
just
was
bang
ever
on the
needed.
door?
Well, in that building, you were on your own.
Nothing, yeah.
But yeah, it's rare that you'd ever have that situation come up, I think. But
Wow.
you could probably taking a hotel key or a credit card, I've smashed it through some other doors. My first apartment here in Richmond actually was one that if I went down to get my mail or something and locked myself out of my own apartment, I could just snake around all the trim and the jam and the whatever, just feed a card in there and it would snake right through all the layers, right to the latch and right in. That was probably the fastest lock I've ever been able to pick.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Didn't make me feel good, being there.
Right. Security. It's the feeling of security. There's you talked about, you alluded to a sidebar mechanism that's interesting in locks. Speaking of hard to pick, the way a sidebar mechanism works is you're not just simply raising and lowering pins to align to a shear line. You're also rotating the pins to align a secondary shear line. So you have, say, 5 pins that all have to find their place vertically, but then each one drops into a chiseled straight left or right orientation in the cut of the key. And those are nearly impossible to pick unless you've got some real special tools and understand what's going on.
You'll see it on the key if you're ever looking at one of those keys.
Yeah,
You can even have multiple shear lines, too.
Schlag makes one. I think it's called Primus. So it's called.
The Primus system does that. Yeah, it has angled
and that's
cuts.
the commercial
There's a
version
few
of it.
others, too. Yeah.
Right. But it's called Sidebar is the concept.
I don't know how you'd know to initiate the proper direction, and you could just by a process of elimination, if you were able to hold each pin into thing and then say, if the first one's spun and the others are not, and then if the second one is spun and the first one's not, and the final 3 are not, like there's just so many combinations of possibility within that. In fact,
we're back to philosophy again. It means that the lock pick that picks that lock is going to look exactly like the key to the lock.
Or a gun.
Or
a battering ram.
Or a drill, or right. Yeah.
Right.
Or
there's not a lot of substitutes.
it's the guy on the inside and holding the doorknob.
Right.
So it means that one of the things you can think of is that a lock is harder and harder to defeat if the thing that can defeat it becomes more and more indistinct from simply the key.
When I was just talking about the number of possible combinations, that reminded me of a delightful moment where in a semi-lucid state one morning, I don't know, I was envisioning how if I could, in movies they'll frequently show they hold a black light up, they see DNA evidence or human evidence on
a keypad?
I guess that's all blood-based or something, in order to see it in a black light. But yeah, you see that, and then you know at least which 4 of the 10 buttons you're looking at.
Right, narrow it down.
And you narrow it down. And then I thought, how many possible combinations are there? Like, could you sit there and reasonably type out with just the 4 known keys? And I called Kevin. I'm still laying in bed. I think my eyes are still closed. I'm like, hey, man, I have a question. And I was like, if you could see just 4 keys to the thing, and you just spun it off. Can you tell us?
Sure, yeah. One thing to ask is each key able to be used more than once? So if I walk up to a keypad and I can tell that 4 buttons are the buttons that open this door.
4-digit pin, 4 keys have been pressed.
So that's great. Now we know the length of the key, this passphrase. So if we know it's 4 characters long and we know that only 4 buttons are involved, we know that there's 4 options for position 1, 4 options for position 2, 4 for 3, 4 for 4. It wouldn't make any sense to have a phrase that's 4 characters long and have 4 keys with wear marks on them, except that they're all involved. So we know that they're each used once. So now the number of combinations is really small. But if we didn't know the phrase length, now we're in trouble. Maybe we know it's between 4 and 20, and we know that some of these keys might be used more than once, so now we have to go back and do some more work. But we've done a huge amount to reduce the number of combinations.
You told me the number off the top of your head, and it was so low, I started arguing with you right away. To me, it was just
it's the idea of factorial.
10,000 minimum, right? It's 9,999. But I don't understand.
It's a thing called 4 factorial.
Right.
It's 4 times 3 times 2, and then times 1 at the end, but it doesn't change the number at that point. So 4 times 3 times 2, which is, anyone?
24?
And that's how many combinations there are.
I'm sure somebody in the comments of this is gonna challenge you on that, and I'd be interested to see
Okay, yeah.
if that develops.
Well, if
into
each
some-
key is used once, then
Are there
we know
any
that.
other
I'm not
theories?
challenging you on it.
Make no mistake.
Well, I tried. I immediately went to the internet. So in the middle of this conversation, I was finally up, coffeed, at my computer on Google, looking up factorial math.
Yeah.
And
It's the
and
exclamation
it was confirmed
point
right away.
on your
Yeah.
calculator. If you ever wonder,
bang.
it's not because
Yeah,
this is
right.
the number and it really is the number. It's which would be fun. I wish my calculator did that.
Emphatic
There's certainly
calculating.
times on exams where I got the number and I wanted to write it with an exclamation point. But the exclamation point is to shorthand this idea of factorial. It's a way of saying I have this many things, and every time I use one, it's no longer in the set. What can I do with what's left?
That explanation
That's the
makes
idea.
that if you hadn't gotten to see under the lid yet in this conversation, that's
That was
that's
the
the
peak
peak
under the
in,
lid.
Yeah. That's
So
nice.
the a classic example in any math textbook is going to be something like books on a shelf. I give you 20 books. How many ways can they be put on a shelf side by side? Well, every time I place a book, it's now out of my hands, so I can only work with what's left.
What was that on the
That's factorial.
LSAT? Or what do you call
Probably,
it?
yeah. It was probably on the LSAT.
All right.
Yeah.
Any other adventures from the world of? So, have you been picking locks around the house?
Yeah, I've done some. We were actually trying to get into my my wife's grandmother's house. She was with us, but the key wasn't available, and so I pulled out this little lock picking set and was starting to pick it. And I didn't end up needing to because they found the key, but it reminded me after probably only a couple of minutes of working on it that exactly what Luke was saying. It is so not like what Hollywood presents, where it's faster to just pick the lock than use a key, according to Hollywood.
Yeah.
You just like walk up and jiggle it,
Yeah.
and then you're in. And that's not at all the way it is for most of the case. Now, I did get one of the picking guns that just you pull the trigger and it just slaps the pins. And I decided, I'm just at home. I was like, well, let me test it on one of my doors. And so I went over to the door and put the little tension on it and clicked it, and it opened right up. And I was shocked because that's exactly how Hollywood makes it look. And it seemed like, why do I have this lock on my house that is so easy to pick? And that's just kind of one of the things that just is a recurring theme of that security is hard, and you trade convenience for security. You can make a impossible to pick lock, or pour concrete over your door or whatever, and yep, no one is going to do that one specific thing that you prevented against, but then the window becomes more desirable, or your ability to just go in and out of your house the way that you'd want to is significantly diminished as a result of your...
We can all be very, very grateful for the rule of law, because we all forget that there's just some foam insulation and a sheet of plywood between
Yeah.
every part of your house and the outside.
Not even plywood.
A half-decent pocket knife will let you into the wall.
door will be a lot harder to deal with than just any part of the house.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about cars? Luke had a great car story, but we all have certainly probably locked ourselves out of our cars or remember helping somebody get into a car.
I've had to let myself into every car I've ever had. My first car was a Volkswagen Thing, 1973. So it was a soft top convertible, and you wouldn't lock it because if somebody wanted whatever was in the car, they would get their pocket knife or even just their fingernails and tear a hole in the top and then take your stuff. And now you've been robbed and you have to buy a new top for your car. So you...
Burglarize.
Thank you.
Robbery is in person. Right. Correct.
So
security terminology.
I might have even been in the car, so maybe it was.
And burglarize. Right.
You learn not to lock your car. You learn not to have anything valuable in it, too. But if somebody wants in to a soft-top car, you let them in.
I'm trying to think. Let's see. I've certainly helped a lot of people get into their cars. I think I had coat hanger skills back when those mattered. Mostly it was I liked shaping the coat hanger device. And I think I do remember some people feeling impatient, like what they wanted me to do was jam a coat hanger into the window as fast as possible and then spend a half hour trying to get the lock open. And what I would do is if I had my Gerber tool with me on a film set or a Leatherman, I'd be just looking and bending and looking and bending, and I'd fashion a
Sculpting.
gate at the opening so that there would be a that the switch, the lock switch, the pin.
What do you call that thing?
basically, the lever. Yeah, what are we talking about?
The thing that popped up.
The thing that pops up.
Right.
It would be guided into a cantilevered opening that would actually tighten the harder you pulled.
Right.
A noose.
So a noose, basically. And so there'd be a gate to guide it in. There'd be a tightening noose action. And then I'd bend it in a long, curved thing. Because the one thing you notice is that you try to get the coat hanger in, and the shape of the door jamb is moving it further and further. The more you feed in, the further away you get from the lock. And so you have to pre-bend the shape that will, as it gets pushed away, you've already counteracted that, and it ends up arriving right where you
Yeah.
need it to arrive in the final position. And I always enjoyed kind of pre-visualizing how that was going to work, and then just going in one time and right out. So
Is
all
there-
preparation, no
Yeah.
trial and error.
Is there any breaking into a modern car? My perception is there's not. with
There
the electronic
is.
lock.
Sometimes it can be easier because of the electronic locks. It's much harder to get around the jams and weather sealing than ever before. And when they send somebody out to help you do that now, they'll actually put in an inflatable airbag, and it really bends your jam away. And
They'll push the corner of the door up and open. And
Yeah.
they'll reach in, and a lot of times all they're trying to do is tickle the unlock button.
Right.
Rather
Poke it.
than
never,
move the
never
mechanism.
easier in one sense, because you just have to
Yeah.
stab the button now
Right.
instead of pull this mechanism with force.
That reminds me of a trick that somebody described to me about in an office environment where you have a door that's locked. One thing you can do is take a car jack and literally push the frame out in the middle and enough for the latch to let go, and just jack open the frame. You probably bend it a little bit, but
I wouldn't be surprised if you could do that in a way that it would spring back to, and because you'd basically be pushing it away from the heads. If it was assembled with nails, you'd be pushing it away from the heads, and the shape memory of the wood would return
Right.
back to the full stop of the nail head. So
yeah.
you'd
Or in a commercial environment, it would be
Metal
drywall
frames.
and a metal frame, and
Yeah.
it would probably be pretty springy in the grand scheme of things.
It doesn't have to move far.
Yeah, you're
You know,
talking
a half
about-
inch might get
Yeah.
you there.
Maybe less, maybe a
maybe
quarter
less.
inch.
Depending
Yeah.
on how the tolerances were, sure.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
And that's assuming that the door was installed properly. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much you have to get right just for it to be the
correctly.
maximum
Work it all.
security, and
Door, yeah.
little eighth inch here, or the lock's upside down or backwards or whatever.
With
And
all the sets that I built over the years, I've done a fair amount of installing doors, and it's probably my least favorite thing to do.
To get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They
Then
drag
again-
and they're crooked and
You
They
watch
stick.
somebody, you guys, I think we all worked in the past on some plays together, and there's a guy named Ricky Sylvia, and that guy could hang a door in a second. And it was, it's just, he had like two simple rules too, and it was just like 3/8 gap here, blah, 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 put it in, stick the door jams in, screw it together, and it's level, it's tight, the tolerances are the same everywhere, and it just do it in minutes. I install a door, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to come back the next day and
Shims.
Keep
lots
going.
of shims.
keep going.
I can get everything right where I want it, and then as soon as I start putting fasteners in it, everything moves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're chasing it. It's like chasing your own tail.
Right. Jumping back to the cars, one thing that I noticed is there are some cars that have this clever idea. The lock-unlock button, instead of being something that you press from above, or instead of being something that you can move back and forth, they built it into a switch that you raise and lower. So to push it down is to lock, and to raise it up is to unlock. If you're reaching in with something and you're trying to press that switch, all you can do is push it down. All you can do is lock the doors,
right.
which we assume is already the problem.
Right.
So by giving the customer this feature, but by putting it in just the right position so that all that a crook can access is the thing that makes it secure, I think that's brilliant. Brilliant
Trying
security.
to think of how this works in a Tesla. They have some unique door latch features. The way to get out of a Tesla is an electronic button, and there's an emergency mechanical lever, But since a crucial part of opening the door on a Tesla is to electronically roll the window down a quarter inch so it doesn't foul the weather stripping, they say don't use the mechanical latch and force it through the weather stripping if you can use the electronic button to unlock the door, and it instantly drops the window down a tiny bit as you're opening it. You don't even really realize
Ford
it's
Mustang
happening.
does that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
A
Yeah,
number of sports
GT,
cars do.
yeah.
A lot of cars that don't have any material above the top of the window will do that, where the window closes into weather stripping that's part of the roof.
Yeah, you close it and you look back and it goes.
Yeah.
Just a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
I've seen that on older cars even for sure, but it's kind of happens so slowly, and you still use a mechanical lever, and some other portion of your action is activating the window. Whereas this is just a push button. It's almost like not the new haptic iPhone button, but like your home button on your phone. Tiny little depression. You barely get a response out of it, and the door pops open. But I'm now wondering if you took your little airbag, pushed the window back if you could without it breaking, and you went and depressed that door button, does it open, or is there an additional lock button to the door button? Frankly, I can't recall.
Yeah, I don't know. It is the 21st century. There is no excuse for somebody pulling on a door handle right when I hit the unlock button, and
To
the
jam up
lock
the mechanism.
will not change state.
Right.
We have got to leave that behind. It's a new mission for this team.
That reminds me of a story of a couple friends of mine, one of whom I hope to have on this podcast to talk about film. But every time he and his buddy would go out, his buddy would try to pull the handle while he was unlocking it on purpose. And he did it for months, and the guy was mad in advance.
Just walk into the car.
And mad all the times that he did it where it was just an inconvenience and a joke. But then he did it one time, and it broke everything. And now they're both locked out of the car, and he's just, the one guy's there just howling because that's who he is. I think that's the same gentleman I described one time to you who I was riding with, and he felt he was at liberty to borrow the steering wheel and take us into some
Orange barrels.
some orange barrels on the freeway. That's what rental cars are for.
Wow.
But yeah, he was a wild card. So it made him
Amazing.
so fun. Well, if anybody doesn't have another lock story
I was
this
just going
time,
to say, I think
please.
you were talking about how the progression of technology in vehicles has sort of removed some of the options to drop a coat hanger through the window to pull on the little lock stub or to drop a Slim Jim into the mechanics. I think it's certainly doing that. I think it's also adding some new surfaces of a more digital attack surface. I've seen tons of articles about cloning keys that are in people's houses because they put them in a little tray by their front door, and if you were close enough to them from the street, you could send the little signal, and the key will tell you the digital signature to unlock the car that's sitting in the driveway. And I know different car manufacturers have had issues where their security has been whatever their security package was, it would be compromised, and you roll up with a laptop or something or a little device, and it'll roll through the codes. And it's that same. The same thing that you find with cheap locks, if the car manufacturer is thinking about the people who are buying the cars, and it needs to just look secure and it needs to lock and I can't open it, but not thinking through what if somebody has a motivation to build the software package to hammer on this, and they aren't adding in those security features because it doesn't really add value that the customer can see. It just adds value kind of on the back end. You can end up with some insecurity that looks fine and feels secure, but then is conceivably as easy to unlock as it ever was before. Or you just have an app running on your phone. You just walk up to the car and unlock it, and away you drive.
Luke and I were, sorry to interrupt, Luke and I were brainstorming on a call button, a Bluetooth, I think it might have going to be a Bluetooth-based call button. And I was wondering, that's how key fob, were you telling me that's how key fobs basically work off, what are they, they're not, what's the radio frequency that like your key fob is reaching out to your car with.
Something in that very high UHF range. There are different technologies, but there are some Bluetooth-oriented things out there in the security fob world. But I think the car remotes are lower in the sub 1,000 megahertz neighborhood.
One thing about just what Andre was sharing, it's not just crooks that have made this system really hard. There are some vehicles that won't allow you to lock the key into the car because it's a key fob that they're expecting to be in your pocket. A friend of mine bought a modern car that came with 2 of these. You keep it in your pocket, it'll open the doors, it'll start the car, everything's great. Won't allow you to lock the key in the car. He and his wife went somewhere, and she decided to leave her purse in the car and wanted to lock it into the car to keep it safe while they briefly did something else. He spent half an hour trying to lock his car and just couldn't. Before it finally occurred to someone, it's because her key was in her purse, sitting in the car. And now they can't secure that key. It must be out of the vehicle.
Right.
Even though they, as sentient people, decided this is what we want.
As the owners.
As the owners decided this is what we want, and the car wouldn't do it.
The key fob concept presents an interesting security challenge because it inherently has to send its unlock request in the clear. You can't really encrypt.
This is what I wanted to fish for, no pun intended, because we're talking about hacking. But I wanted to ask about blue snarfing, and that's why I was kind of asking if that was the frequency range we're talking about. I bet that phrase encapsulates more than just the Bluetooth frequency. But blue snarfing, I think, is what they call that process of trying to capture those transmissions you're talking about, which then are unsecure.
Yeah, and there are different strategies you could employ. Mostly, to do it right, so to speak, you would use a pre-shared secret, and you would send a challenge and a response. So I say blue, and because of a pre-shared relationship, that the response to blue is apple. Or if I say the word table, the correct response is sofa. But if you're simply having a system where there's a one-way communication, that gets a lot harder to secure, and you're broadcasting basically a password in the clear, and anybody with the appropriate radio front end can listen to it and say, okay, well, I could say that. And simply say it.
It's sofa.
Yeah, so there you go.
So, that's a couple cars unlocked, right?
Yeah, so the radio, the in the clear radio transmission, to really be secure, takes some effort. And like Andre was saying, the car maker doesn't have a lot of incentive to seriously secure that beyond just the feeling of or security theater, and beyond that, it just has to work.
If you found out your car was stolen, would you really, your first moment of anger, would it be at the car maker? It's at the thief.
It is at the thief. I will say I had 3 1992 Honda Accords stolen.
Really?
And the police told me it was because there was a master key that was compromised in our market, and that particular car was the most stolen car in our city.
Really?
And it was because of this specific compromise.
Wow.
And so that did make you feel a little bad that there was
That's a fair answer to that.
corporate
really
failure.
good
Absolutely.
You blamed Honda.
Corporate failure. You mentioned the sending the signals in the clear and the two-way handshake concept. I'll just tease that I'd like us all to come back and talk about digital security on another occasion.
Yeah.
It made me think of course, the chip reading cards now, which I know you guys can explain for us, and how I think it involves that two-way handshake.
It is a two-way handshake, yeah.
You're talking
it's
about
a challenge authentication. It's a back and forth. It's not just here's my 16-digit credit card number in the clear. It's much more complex, and it's two-way, and it's back and forth. It's proved to me, Mr. Unknown, that we have this pre-shared connection, and there's a back and forth that mathematically proves that, and we can get into that in detail in a future episode.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
So with that, we'll wrap today's episode up. We would love if you'd share your stories of maybe getting locked into or out of something. in the comments section below, and we'll look forward to reading those and responding to the things you share with us. So we'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.